All right, chat, to get this out of the way, this isn't about Julement. Julement is a bad card. The deck will never run Julement unless they print something that is high quality enough that I think breaks the game. So we're not here to talk about Julement. We're talking about original base Granfia. So I want to talk about Granfia in the context of the meta, because right now we are currently in a format where we have strong write-ups and we have removal. And it's not that strong write-ups didn't exist previously, right? Before our current format, we had the King's format, so that's Rezile and Levidras, and both of these were very strong. They had strong write-ups. They had, well, Rezile had good early game. Levidras didn't, but Levidras had strong output on its write-up and thereon after. But the big change with this meta is that there is removal. So Basarga can wipe the field, and it can wipe one in the back row, which would be our Rose. And then there's Vergilla, which binds, which makes us unable to recur our pieces. And then there's Heart Luru. When it rides up, it doesn't need to go into its giant fluff. It can go into the Coaster Shark, which will be swinging into our Rosariums. So why does this change in the meta necessitate a change in how we play Granfia? Well, the problem is that even though we had our promo printed, which is the Shawa Shawa Kabur, that only protects the Noblesse Rose, right? So even though we can protect only the Noblesse Rose, we're still going to lose our front row and whatever we have on the sides. So we're going to lose our Rosariums, we're going to lose Pumpkin, we're going to lose Darien. And because of that, even if we do survive to our turn 4, we can't necessarily rebuild our board very easily, considering the engine requirements, the cards we need to run to draw into defensive pieces. So because we can't play for a turn 4 as easily in the current metagame, I believe that we need to be investing further into our turn 3 and then further gambling on an aggressive game plan that doesn't plan on living to turn 4. So this video is going to be sort of in 2 parts. I'm going to talk about my deck profile first, and the reason I chose certain cards and took out other certain cards from my previous video. And the second part of the video, I want to talk about what Granfia's problems are. And this is going to be informed by my experience bringing to BCS Rosemont, where I was the only player in the room on Granfia, of course. So I hope that you stick through the entire video, because I think the problems that Granfia faces aren't necessarily intuitive. They aren't necessarily problems with the cards themselves. So yeah, alright, let's get on with it. So this is the current deck log that I'm playing. It's the deck profile that I brought to Chicago. And to compare it to my previous list, these are the cards I added and the cards I removed. So I swapped ride lines, I took out Heals, PGs, Cooter, Root, Roalua, Pumpkin, Eliana, and Broccoli. And I changed to the original Zorga ride line. I added the Ace unit, Harvest Elf, Guncycler, Buds, Maedith, which is a promo that we didn't have at the time in English, but Japan would have had, I believe, in the format, and as well as Shadow Cloak and Alvina. So let's start with the ride line. So in my previous video, I talked about how Roa's ride line wasn't really value efficient, and because of that, Granfia's ride line needed to be run because it's ever just slightly more efficient and it has the name bonus. Well, the problem with that is that that doesn't really offer enough value, and with the addition of Harvest Elf, we don't need the Granfia name anymore to have a third early game token generator in the deck. So in order to support the early game aggressive gameplay style, I swapped to Ranker Chain and Black Tear's Husk Dragon. So what Ranker Chain does is that because you're drawing for turn, drawing for going second, and maybe you draw off a Gun Cycler, and then you draw 2 off Ranker Chain, that's 5 cards up the top of your deck that help you potentially draw into your pieces like Shrooms or Rosarium or an order to play. And then an order to play is really important because we're also running Black Tear's Husk Dragon, which lets us reuse our buds. So turn 1, turn 2 buds is a really important part of an aggressive strategy. In fact, if I remember correctly, the Lenorn Masks deck that topped in Daivangasai ran 1 copy and found it consistently over the course of their run, and that's part of the reason they won. So we're using that same sort of offensive core to ensure that we have a good early game and we can secure enough damage to get to our lethal. Guncycler should have been in the previous build. I finally bought it, so I'm finally running it. It's very much I decided to finally cave and buy this, but I'm pretty sure it would have been correct in the previous list. Contrary to what I might have said it early in the video, Guncyclers have a lot of defensive value, maybe over the offensive value. Because we cut Broccoli, we need card draw sometimes to draw into a trigger to maybe help us last through an offensive turn. And because it's like a 5k shield that's delayed into a 15k shield, it can form a cornerstone of our early defense in a way that Broccoli couldn't, as well as serving its main purpose of being a discard fodder. Yeah. I think the strongest card in the deck is Shadow Cloak, and that's because it was designed in a time of the game that didn't have Regulus pieces yet, and because of that it doesn't have the Regulus piece restriction. So we mill out the Fire Regulus, so it's a 1 card that converts into a top 5 search, but it's also an important consistency piece because it can fetch out our 1 of order Mythic Habitat in case we need insurance, like we pulled Buds and Silver White, but we didn't pull enough Rosariums, and we need something to play in order to turn our Maideth on. Shadow Cloak is a fantastic way to ensure the consistency of the deck. It's also a really easy turn 2 commit because usually with the current board that we're building, we usually have 1 space that's unoccupied. So we make sure that the empty column, the empty front row column can be filled by Shadow Cloak on turn 2 after moving the plant token back. And that if we have the extra soul, we can pay Soul Lost 1 to make it a 50k, which is, I have won games off of that 5k. So Shadow Cloak is a really important card in the deck. I don't see it being replaced because current card design sort of mandates that Regulus piece locks are on cards that search like this. So I think Shadow Cloak is around to stay. Yeah. The next card is the Ace Unit. The Ace Unit is something that didn't exist at the time of my previous deck profile, but we're obviously running it because it can search. It can potentially get us a +2, which is really important in the context of the Buffsargra matchup, because there are games where we don't draw into Shrooms early, so we have to commit Rosarium in order to get our columns. And when our Rosarium gets retired by the Buffsargra Mace, we can use Pence, mill out something that we need to mill, like a Fire Regulus, or perhaps another Rosarium that we need to revive with Alvina, and then bring back the Rosarium that was retired by Buffsargra into our board. So Ace Unit, I don't think nothing will ever outpower the Ace Unit in terms of search capability. It's not really a good turn 2 commit because it calls immediately, and usually we already have a full board, so you want to hold onto it in your hand, but because its search is so good, you have to run it. So Maideth is a promo that we didn't have in our previous deck profile. It wasn't out by then, but it is a really important consistency piece. I think that without Maedith, Granfia wouldn't be something I would have brought to an event. Because it's a top 5 search that we can play as many copies as we want from our hand. So once we play our order for turn, usually silver white, but sometimes habitat, we can get our Fire Regulus if we didn't search it off Shadow Cloak already. We can call Shrooms, which makes Maedith soul neutral, so effectively it's an on-place plus 15k to our entire front row. It can get our Rosarium, which is its job most of the time, or it can call out Pence, our ace unit, which can chain into something else. So there are a lot of games where I will draw 3 Maediths, and I will have to activate all of them, and that is sort of the beating heart of the consistency of this deck. So you will need to run all 4. I think that when I tested this at 3 before, I was running into too many games where I only saw 1 or 2 Maediths and I wasn't able to close it out. I will note that, importantly, Fire Regulus can also call Maedith. So whenever if you plan on activating your Fire Regulus on your turn 3, make sure you already played your order in case you need to chain off Fire Regulus into your Maedith. So yeah. Alvina, in my previous deck profile, I said that Alvina wasn't a card that I wanted necessarily to run because I would rather have a piece that I can search or draw into rather than Alvina in case I didn't have a piece that I could call off of Alvina. But because we're switching to an order heavy focus, Alvina is sort of more important because let's say we only have 1 order in our hand that we discard off our Rancor Chain. We play Alvina, get it back to play. Or let's say we need to use Mythiarch Habitat. But because we can't recur our order off Blackseer's Husk because that's an on-place on grade 2, Shadow Cloak, Mill Habitat needs to be, you need to recur to Habitat off Alvina. So I think Alvina would be less important if it only called the unit. Its main cornerstone role in this deck is to ensure that we have an order to play, and calling a unit back, for example, to fulfill the full board for Silver White is more auxiliary, because if we wanted to fill a board, we could spend our CV on something like Diantha, for example. So, and save energy for Guncyclers. So yeah, Alvina is kind of irreplaceable in the current build because it recurs orders that in a way that other cards really can't do. Like Growlithe is a grade 3, so it can't fulfill Silver White's condition, and it can't be played early. So Alvina is irreplaceable, even if it's not the usage that you would initially think, like I was thinking that I would have to apply it in my previous video. So Harvest Elf is a card that came out very recently. It has been tested in a lot of decks. Night Rose plays it, Leonorn plays it, Belger the Sky Ruler plays it, but I think Harvest Elf is sort of debatable because of the cost of Soul Blast 1 to make a token. Because it has that cost, we can't really use it effectively turn 1 unless you draw our Shrooms. And even if we want to use it on our turn 2, we have to keep in mind that we're trying to use our Soul on Maedith. So that Soul Blast 1 can be really tough to handle sometimes. But it does help us win more games because it's a 5k base, and that combines really well with Buds. And Buds, because that's the offensive core of our deck, Harvest Elf wins games that wouldn't have been won without it, but will also potentially lose you games had you had something that could have been played earlier or isn't a dead draw on your turn 3. So I think Harvest Elf is a card that can be replaced if Granfia maybe or gets something good shared with Essention that lets us call out a plant token earlier. We can't run Essention's Rustiana because Energy Blast 3 is kind of hefty to pay in this deck now that we're running both Alvina and Guncycler. So it'll have to be a new card that takes Harvest Elf slot. But for the time being, I think Harvest Elf is a good enough piece to run in this deck. So in the comments of my previous video, I said that Buds wasn't a good card to run because it was sort of a dead order to play on turn 3. Well, I've done a lot of reflecting. Part of it is the metagame that's changed, and part of it is sort of my realization that it is just better. So in the base case that you sort of mid-roll and you don't assemble a full board of tokens, Buds allows you to make 2 15k bodies, which is important because that's 2 cards that will ask for 10k or 15k shields, and then your Vanguard swing will also have its pressure, right? Because the only decks in the format that... There are more decks in the format that run higher shields. So Black Horse and Heartluru, for example, or Ezreal, being able to ensure that they can't guard these swings easily unless they draw into their big shield pieces is really nice. So in the case that you had Eliana, like we did previously in our build, this would ask for 2 5k shields and 1 15k shield. So they would obviously know about the 15k unless it had a crit on it from the Vanguard swing. But guarding 2 5ks is pretty easy, even if the Vanguard swing does have its pressure, because they can guard with the 15k and that makes it OT pass. So because Eliana doesn't really force your opponent to either guard with their big shields early, and it makes it easier for them to guard with whatever normal hand in case the opponent's deck doesn't run big shields. Like, for example, I don't know, Flamglam doesn't run extra big shields. So Eliana doesn't really help in most cases, and it's better. Eliana's better in a non-order build, but now that we're switching to an order-heavy build, Buds is just helps fill that count and is good with our Black Tears Husk. So Eliana's out. In the case that we have Harvest Elf, it's really good because when our Vanguard column has that 15k token behind it, it makes our Vanguard swing for 23 on grade 1 and 25 on grade 2. And that means that if they have a 15k shield, that is even. So they need to add more shield on top of that, but a 5k would make it 1 to pass. So they'll typically no-guard the Vanguard, which makes it a lot easier for us to pass triggers onto our 30k column. So because Buds also lets us form a big Vanguard column in the games that we do open a strong early, it really helps us lock in early damage, especially if we fill up a crit, right? Now they have to guard 40k swing as well as take 2 damage on our Vanguard swing, which in a lot of games will push them to 3, and then that's pretty much the game won unless they draw 3 PGs, right? So Buds is really important now. And I think in our previous meta, the Kings meta, where they had a lot of grade 3s, so Rezile had itself, it had its Vita, it had Gabrielius, and Levidros had it, Emporio, and Charmnet, where Eliana could potentially scam a game out because they had all grade 3s in their hand. Now that we're in a format where these decks don't necessarily run so many grade 3s, like Vergil has a lot of grade 3s, but Befsargra and Heartluru don't, I think Buds becomes more important in the context of that. Alright, now let's talk about the cards I took out, and the cards I'm not including. So that promo, I originally tried it out, and I replied in a previous comment to my video saying that it is a good card. The problem is that, well, we aren't using protection mode because even if we lose it, we lose our Rosariums. So we'd rather go for the 3 gauge, right? But the problem is that a ceiling increase is kind of win more in the context of I would rather play Maedith, which not only can get me the same amount of power if it gets a Shrooms, but it can also get Rosarium. So the promo doesn't really... It's not efficient enough for Soul Blast 1 to make the cut. Roalua has to go. The numbers are too guardable. It swings for 40k the first time and 65k the second time. These numbers are very guardable. Just having one on your field makes your opponent able to guard a turn that they wouldn't have if it was just 2 Rosariums. So instead of running Roalua, I'd rather run consistency pieces to get to our Rosariums. Broccoli is a good card, but Maedith for the top 5 search is just better than CV1 draw. The 5k shield extra Broccoli would be nice, but we have Guncycler now to sort of cover that defensive purpose. And even though we're on an order heavy build, we run enough that we kind of don't need Cooter, especially since Cooter can't get Regulus pieces. So Shadow Cloak fills the spot of Cooter in a much better way. And discard 1 is kind of a heavy cost to pay, especially since we're running very lean on defense, and we kind of need every card in hand that we can hold on to. Heals and PGs have both been taken out. I think that PGs can eventually come back depending on the metagame, but we cannot run heals. And the reason for that is because we're planning on pushing them to a lot higher damage early, and then trying to guard as much as we can on our grade 1 while our opponent's on their grade 2, so that we can soak up damage on their write-up. So our heals won't proc when we want them to, and there's a chance that it'll backfire on us if we heal out, and that makes it possible for our opponent to maybe 5th heal when they would have checked it on their 5th damage, and that helps win them the game. PGs, we don't have the card draw to draw into enough PGs to survive most write-ups, in my opinion. In our turn 4s, because even if we do make it through our turn 3s, just because we have that PG, it kind of tanks the consistency a little bit, but it also means that, let's say we're holding just a PG and our drive checks in our hand. We don't have the hand to live unless we flip like OT or something. So I'd rather drop the PGs unless a deck comes out where we absolutely need to have a PG to live the opponent's write-up. So I think, for example, we got the skills revealed for Amon recently. I think Amon, if that deck becomes a problem, might be a reason to tech in 2 PGs so that we have one for the Vanguard swing so we don't get blown out. But PGs, if you guard smart, you, for the most part, you won't need. Alright, that covers the deck profile part. Now let's talk about the problems. And the problems with Granfia aren't so much as to the cards themselves. Like, Granfia doesn't get good cards, so we're running a lot of high value generics, and those generics aren't really easily replaced. Like, I don't see Bushiroad printing cards for Granfia at all, to be honest, but they won't be good enough to take the slot of a generic in most cases. I think most of the problems with Granfia come down to the rules of the game and the meta of the game. So what I mean by that is, the first thing is that in the meta right now, we have a lot of decks with crits or thinning into crits, and that means that we are extra sensitive to variance. Even if we guard a lot on our turn 2, so that we have 0 damage going into their write-up, we have to only take 5 damage, and that's really hard when Heartluru can thin into Red OT, which is pretty much an instant win against most decks, but especially our deck. Or it can go into triple crit, and then we just die, and they have Blaviloss, which is a crit rear guard that's pretty hard to guard because it gets 10k off the Vanguard skill. Buffsargra gets crit, and we have to no guard that unless we draw our OT for the most part. And so if it flips blue OT or any crits, and they put that power onto the rear, and we take a bunch of damage off the Vanguard, I'm pretty sure that in all cases we just lose. So the deck is extra sensitive to variance, which is sort of fine in a low number of rounds locals, but so long as there are decks that have crits or can push high damage with good enough variance, it sucks in a high number of rounds environment like a competitive event, right? The second problem is that because we're leaning even harder into aggression and lowering our defense, that opens us up to problems where decks either kind of blow us out, like B heroes, which they take all the damage, then they kill us because they can extend one attack for each CB, or there's Varga, which even though they're not necessarily threatening when they sack, because we are taking damage up to 4, that enables their divine skill. Or for example, Fennel, which I'm going to say this, it's probably the worst matchup for the deck because it can filter a lot, but we can't really hold back on taking damage, which makes Fennel or like Zorga, for example, which have a lot of 2 crit swings, that makes it extra threatening when they have the numbers behind it and we don't have the shield. So the other big problem, and it's one that I ran into especially hard at Rosemont, is that going second is very comfortable decision for a lot of players right now. And I don't mean optimal. Like for example, Vergilla, I wouldn't say going second is optimal. There are a lot of benefits to going second in the mirror, which is why they might pick second if they win the die roll. But there are a lot of benefits to going first. Basarga can Yugma Shot, Harluru gets triple drive, Minerva always wants to go second. But when I say it's comfortable, I don't mean that it's optimal. I mean that when they are thinking about whether they go first or second, going second isn't necessarily like, oh, I'm going to lose. It's a much easier decision for them to go second if they think that I'm a going second deck. And the main problem, I think, with Granfia in the context of going second is that, okay, so in order to talk about this problem, I need to talk about my BCX experience. So I went 3-4. I think that's an okay record for a deck that's so off the radar. But the important part is to look at my last 4 rounds. I lost dice roll in all last 4 rounds, and they took second all 4 rounds. They were Harluru, Minerva, Vergilla, and Bavs. So Minerva always goes second. That's not a surprise. Vergilla, them going second is sort of they see Elf Knights and how they can only use that going second, so they take advantage of the early game and Elf Knights going second. That's understandable. But Sargra has Yugma Shot, and I can get that. They want the extra 5 attacks, so they don't feel uncomfortable with going second. The problem is this round. Harluru doesn't want to go second. They part of the reason why Harluru is so good is that they go first. Their turn 3 write-up isn't that scary, but on their turn 4, they've thinned a lot and they can Persona Write. So why did my opponent feel comfortable going second? The problem is that we have a 15 token pile on the side of our deck, and because of that, that thins the field of decks down to just Granfia and Estacion. We don't have any other decks that have such a big token pile. And when they see this, they instinctively know that it is a token rush deck. Now, I will say, if they were a good player, they still would have gone first, in my opinion. Because Estacion isn't like Granfia in that it's forced to go second. Estacion has a lot of plays that it can make going first. The problem is that the average player might be afraid of token rush. Like, tokens are very aggressive, and that can win a lot of games that the players feel like they're cheated out of. So I think people instinctively, they'll hedge their bets and go second because they're afraid of rush when they really shouldn't be. And that is bad for us, because if they always go second, Granfia doesn't have any going first place. We need to grade 2 game, and that's really bad because that gives us them more time to find PGs, and that also means that we're not drawing our card for going second. We don't get that extra battle phase where our opponent hasn't drawn into triggers after putting them back in the mulligan. So the fact that the floor rules ask us to put our 15 token pile on the side is really detrimental to Granfia, right? So unless something changes around the floor rules, that amount of information that the opponent gets is just really debilitating to Granfia's ability to get its going second in the dice roll when people are afraid to rush, right? So I think in order for Granfia to get better, what it needs isn't good cards for itself. The first thing I think that Granfia needs is defensive creep on the part of other decks. And that is in order to make players feel more comfortable with going first. For example, in Premium, they printed Heal Guardians, which let you get 10k to your Vanguard. Now, it might seem counterintuitive that a aggressive rush deck might want opponents to have more defense, but the reality is, if they print more defensive creep, those numbers are probably just going to be plus 10k realistically. And an 18k Vanguard still has to guard for 15k one to pass, or 15k against a 30k, which is our column of 2 5ks with buds. So I think Granfia can still deal very strong pressure even if the opponent's Vanguard is 18k base, and they might feel more comfortable going first, holding that heal guard or whatever defensive tool is printed, but they can only, realistically, they'll probably only draw one, and then you can still blow them out on your turn 2. So if there's defensive creep, people will be more comfortable taking going first, and that allows Granfia to get more games where it gets its going second and isn't in a sort of dead situation. The second thing is that the meta needs more decks that have less incentive to blind second, right? So right now in our meta, we have Vergilla. People are blinding second because the Mirror and Elf Knights makes them want to go second. Bafsargra has multi-attack if it goes second. Heartlooter has triple drive, even though I don't think that's enough to make me want to go second. There are players that, I don't know, they feel like that's fine with them. And Minerva always goes second. So those are the top 4 decks. Once those decks move out of the meta and are replaced by, for example, Odium, if that gets a good card, that deck doesn't really have a strong incentive to go second because it needs to put people on a countdown towards its high pressure Divine Skill turn. Or, for example, Chris Rain Cadenza, which doesn't need to go second, it'd rather go first, get that Persona ride, and just blow them out with the Divine Skill. The more decks there are that have less incentive to blind second, the stronger our position will be. Even if they see the 15 token pile, they might say, oh, I'll just hold out on the rush, I'll live it, and then blow them out on the turn 4. But because they won't necessarily always kill on their turn 3, and we live to our turn 3, we kill them before they get to their Persona ride, which is their achieved goal going first. And the third thing that Granfia needs, it needs Estacion to get buffs that are making it a good going first deck. And that's because if we have too much information given to our opponent that make us think it has to be either Granfia or Estacion, we need our opponent to assume it's the better deck, and they need to go first to deny Estacion their going first, so that they don't get screwed over by a strong Estacion Persona ride turn or whatever. And because they think that, then maybe we can get our Granfia kill turn. So I don't know if they'll print good Estacion support in set 12. It's a Skyride set, and I hope it gets a good going first tool. But if it gets a going second tool, that puts Granfia in a bad situation, because then people will start stealing second thinking it's Estacion. So whatever happens to Estacion, it needs to be a tool that incentivizes going first. Otherwise, we're in a bad position. Yeah, so that's sort of the end of the video for now. This video is already pretty long, but I want to do another video talking about the science of the scam. And that's because I play a lot of scam decks, and so there's been sort of a resurgence in scam strategies because the card pool is getting wider and people are getting access to more things that can enable a scam. But when I played Leonore Masks, I sort of realized that Leonore Masks is popular and tops not because it's a good scam deck, but because people like Leonore. And I think that there's a strong argument to be made that Granfia beats Leonore Masks in terms of how well it can scam, how consistently it can scam. That mean that people aren't topping with Granfia in a scam playstyle because it's not being played and it's not popular. So I want to make that argument in a separate video, and this video is already really long, so I'm just gonna cut it right here. And when I get to around to it in a couple of months, I'll explain my thought process behind that. All right, so see you, chat.